Good morning, hi, and welcome to Good Friday. Welcome to my little series entitled Why. Today, I should be asking a simple question: why the cross? So, I'm going to read the Bible account from three different Gospels, different bits of it, of the crucifixion of Jesus, which happened today, thousands and thousands of years ago. I've taken it from a few different Gospels because each of the writers have their own different take on the story, and so I want to tell you as much of what happened as possible. So that's why I'm taking it from different writers. So this is a true story. This happened. As I always say, there's historical evidence for all of this. So this is what I'm going to be reading today. It won't take too long, especially won't take as long as I did last night, my 10 o'clock reading. I did enjoy doing that. Okay, so let's start in Matthew 27, right? By now, this is very, very early in the morning, okay, on a Friday. Early in the morning, all the chief priests and the elders of the people came to the decision to put Jesus to death. They bound him, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate, the governor, the Roman governor. When Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that Jesus was condemned, he was seized with remorse and returned the 30 silver coins to the chief priests and the elders. If you remember, the 30 silver coins were the price for a slave. So he gave them back. He said, "I've sinned. I've betrayed innocent blood. What's that to us?" They replied, "That's your responsibility." So Judas threw the money into the temple and left. Then he went away and hanged himself. The chief priests picked up the coins and said, "It's against the law to put this into the treasury since it's blood money." So they decided to use the money to buy the potter's field as a burial place for foreigners. This is why it's called the Field of Blood to this day. And this is what was spoken by the prophet Jeremiah hundreds of years ago to say, "They took the 30 silver coins, the price set on him by the people of Israel, and they used them to buy the potter's field, as the Lord commanded me." It's amazing. That was written so many years before. The Bible does that quite a lot. Okay, now I'm going to jump to John for carrying on with the story, a different account of it. John 18. Right. So as Matthew says, by now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanliness, the Jews didn't enter the palace of Pilate. They wanted to be able to eat the Passover. If they were unclean, they wouldn't be allowed to have the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and asked, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" "If he were not a criminal," they replied, "we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate said, "Take him by yourselves and judge him by your own law." "But we have no right to execute anyone," the Jews objected. This happened so that the words Jesus had spoken indicating the kind of death he was going to die would be fulfilled. Honestly, the cheek of it, honestly, they have no right to kill anybody, the Jews. Man. Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Just going to point out that by Pilate summoning Jesus in was also making Jesus unclean in the Jewish laws. But I don't suppose that matters because of what is going to happen. So, right, let's get back to it. Pilate asked Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Is that your own idea?" Jesus asked. "Or did others talk to you about me?" "Am I a Jew?" Pilate replied. "It was your people and your chief priests who handed you over to me. What is it you've done?" Jesus replied, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jews. But now my kingdom is from another place." "Oh, you are a king then?" said Pilate. Jesus answered, "You are right in saying I am a king. In fact, for this reason I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." "What is truth?" Pilate asked. With this he went out again to the Jews and said, "I find no basis for a charge against this man. But it is your custom for me to release to you one prisoner at this time, the time of the Passover. Do you want me to release the king of the Jews? They shouted back, No! Not him! Give us Barabbas! Now Barabbas had taken part in a rebellion. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. In some accounts, flogged with a cat of nine tails, which is a whip with 9 cords on it, each with bits of jagged metal and bones on it. So you're getting whipped 9 times over with every. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, Hail, King of the Jews! And they struck him in the face. Once more Pilate came out and said to the Jews, Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him. When Jesus came out, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, Here is the man. As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, Crucify! Crucify! But Pilate answered, You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him. The Jews insisted, We have a law, and according to that law, he must die because he claims to be the Son of God. When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid. And he went back inside the palace. Where do you come from? He asked Jesus, but Jesus gave him no answer. Do you refuse to speak to me? Pilate said. Don't you realize I have power either to free you or to crucify you? You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin, Jesus said. From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free, but the Jews kept shouting, If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar. Now when Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judge's seat at a place known as the stone pavement, which in Aramaic is Gabbatha. It was the day of preparation of Passover. About the 6th hour. Shh. That's why I go on to live on the main road. People like to let themselves be known. Okay, the 6th hour. Here is your king, Pilate said. But they shouted, Take him away! Take him away! Crucify him! Shall I crucify your king? Pilate asked. We have no king but Caesar, the chief priests answered. Finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified. Now I'm going to jump to Luke. Because as I said, every different writer has a different way of writing this story. As they led him away, Jesus that is, they seized Simon from Cyrene, who was on his way in from the country, and they put the cross on him and made him carry it behind Jesus. In some other translations, it's that they both carry the cross together, because it's a big hunk of wood, it's very heavy. A large number of people followed him, including women who mourned, and they wailed for him. Jesus turned and said to them, Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children. For the time will come when you will say, Blessed are the barren women, the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed. Then they will say to the mountains, Fall on us, and to the hills, Cover us. For if men do these things when the tree is green, what will happen when it is dry? That's deep stuff. Jesus just quoted something from Hosea, which is another prophet written hundreds of years ago. That's interesting that, for if these men do stuff like this when the tree is green, what will happen when the tree is dry? You're doing a horrible thing when life seems to be okay, or the state of life for everyone seems to be okay. What's going to happen later on? 2 other men, both criminals, were also led out with him to be executed. When they came to the place called the Skull, Golgotha, there they crucified him, along with the criminals, one on his right, the other on his left. Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. The people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him. They said, "He saved others. Let him save himself if he is the Christ of God, the chosen one." The soldiers also came up and mocked him. They offered him wine vinegar, and they said, "If you're the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was a written notice above him which read, "This is the King of the Jews." Of the criminals who hung there, one of them hurled insults at him. "Aren't you the Christ? Save yourself, and us." But the other criminal rebuked him. "Don't you fear God," he said, "since you're under the same judgment, the same sentence? We're punished justly, for we're getting what our deeds deserve, but this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus answered, "I tell you the truth. Today you will be with me in paradise." I'm going to jump back to John just for a little bit of the story. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother. Can you imagine that? Jesus' mother standing there watching. Also there stood his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother there, and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, the disciple who Jesus loved is John, the guy who wrote these words. John never names himself. He said to his mother, Jesus said, "Dear woman, here is your son." And to John he said, "Here is your mother." From that time on, this disciple took her into his home. The guy writing these words, an adoptive mother. How lovely is that? I mean, Jesus is dying on the cross in agony, can't breathe, crucifixion, and yet he sees his mum and he's like, "Oh, who's going to take care of her?" In those old days, you know, Mary was already a widow by then, because Joseph, Jesus' earthly dad, had died much before that, so there was no one to look after her when Jesus went. So, yeah, Jesus cared about what was going to happen to her. Right. And I'm finally going to go back to Matthew to finish this story. Turn the page. No. Right, so Jesus crucified for many hours he hung there. From the 6th hour until the 9th hour, darkness came all over the land. About the 9th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Some people think that this is a reference of Jesus saying, "God, where are you?" But actually Jesus was quoting a psalm, Psalm 22, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Psalm 22, which is well worth reading, written thousands and thousands of years before this. And it is a wonderful, it foretells the event of the crucifixion scarily well. Coincidence? No, I don't think so, not at all. So Jesus quotes from the psalm because he knows it off by heart. It's well worth reading, actually. I might do that tomorrow, actually, Psalm 22. Jesus quotes from that, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of those standing there heard this, they said, "He's calling Elijah." Immediately, one of them ran and got a sponge. He filled it with some wine vinegar, put it on a stick, and offered it to Jesus to drink. The rest said, "Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him." That's not what Jesus was doing. And when Jesus cried out, in John he shouted, "It is finished." He cried in a loud voice, and he gave up his spirit. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two, from top to bottom. The earth shook, and the rocks split. The tombs broke open, and the bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs, and after Jesus' resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many people. When the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified and exclaimed, "Surely this was the Son of God." Many women were there, watching from a distance. They'd followed Jesus from Galilee to care for his needs. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of Zebedee's sons. And of course, that's Jesus' mother, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, were Jesus' brothers. As evening approached on the Friday, there came a rich man from Arimathea called Joseph, who had himself become a disciple of Jesus. Going to Pilate, he asked for Jesus' body, and Pilate ordered that it be given to him. Joseph took the body, wrapped it in a clean linen cloth, and placed it in his own new tomb that he had cut out of the rock. He rolled a big stone in front of the entrance, and then he went away. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were sitting there, opposite the tomb. 3 guesses what they were doing. That's all for today. The question was, why the cross? I'll tell you very simply why the cross. When somebody does wrong in the world, when somebody does a crime, they deserve punishment. We expect for them to be punished. And you would agree with me with this. Say someone who does something really, really horribly wrong. Of course they deserve to be punished. If they get off with it, there's no justice. Or what if I was to say that every single human on the planet has done wrong? Argue with me if you like, but we've all done bad things. We all do bad things. And that's just the nature of us. And I say God never does wrong. God wants to have a relationship with us and has always wanted to have a relationship with us. For us to know God, to be in relationship with him, we're sinful. He is not. He's pure and holy. The two can't mix. It doesn't work. And so a sacrifice has to be made. The penalty for sin is death, the Bible says. The punishment for doing wrong, you have to be punished. Otherwise you can't get to be with God. So God had a plan for this. Ever since the fall of man in the very beginning, in the garden, when mankind chose to do their own thing and to fall away from God, God had a plan for redeeming mankind. The only way which we could have been saved, the only way, was by someone who had never ever sinned to die for us. Jesus. And so he did. There were hundreds of years of people trying to offer sacrifices of animals and killing and offering burnt and blood offerings to God for their sins, but that was never enough. It had to be Jesus. God was the only one who could save us, and so he did, and that is why the cross. The only way that we can get to be with God is by the death of God. And that's what we celebrate today. We thank him for it, otherwise we wouldn't be able to go to heaven. What about for you guys who are listening to this and you don't believe? You don't believe in God. You don't believe that Jesus is God. I would say you maybe don't believe in Jesus, but Jesus was there. There's enough historical evidence for it to, you can't say he didn't exist. And this is a true story, as I've said. So what does this mean for you? Is the question I'm going to ask you. What does this mean for you? Yeah. Anyway, I'm going to go now. I'll be back tomorrow. I might read Psalm 22 actually, because it's fascinating. Thousands of years written in the future. Written about the future. So yeah, that's why the cross. What does it mean for you? I'll see you tomorrow morning. And have a good Friday. Eat hot cross buns and be well. And just one final thing. I believe that Jesus died for all of us because he loves us. And he wants the very, very best for us. So if you take nothing else from this, know that you are loved. And I believe that there's a God up there who loves you so, so much. John out.